It's a wild day in the world of Magic the Gathering, as Wizards of the Coast is facing a major problem with their upcoming championship. On top of that, it's been revealed they've also made a huge change to the way they handle card complexity.
Magic. I am a wizard! History. I'm an old wizard! The magic historian. My bones hurt.
Greetings, owners of fine luxury cardboard rectangles. My friends, I hope the day finds you well because we have gathered for another installment of Mega Magic News. The two biggest items that we have to talk about obviously being the championship issues and the change in Magic complexity rules. So we're going to start out talking about the tournament. Now, this is a recent development, obviously. Wizards of the Coast has just decided to return to the paper style of Pro Tours, right? But they're also going to be interweaving Arena and MTGO into the proceedings as well. And that's actually where they're running into the problem with the upcoming Capenna Championship. So, the Capenna Championship is supposed to deliver up the final 6 competitors for the World Championship, the major event. But here's the problem, and this is an issue that we're seeing with Arena in multiple iterations. We've seen this happen in the past. Up on the screen, I'm going to put a card up for you that is at the heart of our problem here. This is Obscura Interceptor, right? 1 black, 1 blue, 1 white, and a generic mana get you a 3/1 Cephalid Wizard that admittedly doesn't look like any Cephalids we've seen before, but still is a funky design. Anyhow, that off to the side. It's got Flash and lifelink, but its main ability is when it enters the battlefield, it connives. And when you connive, you get to return up to 1 target spell to its owner's hand, right? So this is clearly a very powerful control maneuver. This isn't a card that is some side common that doesn't matter or anything like that. This is something people will be actually actively using, and it is bugged in a major way that destroys the most important part of the functionality of the card. So what I'm trying to say here is, if you put out an Obscura Interceptor, let's say I've cast a spell, I've cast Goat Tickler, and you're like, nah, son, you're not tickling my goats today. So you play the Obscura Interceptor, and you go, I'm gonna target your Goat Tickler spell on the stack. And I go, no, the tickle is gonna happen. So then I destroy your Obscura Interceptor. Now, under normal Magic rules, the ability's already on the stack. It's going to resolve as normal, and Goat Tickler will get put back into my hand. But that's not what happens on Arena. If you can destroy the Obscura Interceptor while the trigger is still on the stack, then the trigger will not do anything. You don't actually get to bounce the spell, thus invalidating the main power of the card and frustrating any decks in particular that will be running this. Now, this is a big issue. We've seen this with Arena time and again, where the cards just aren't up to snuff. They're not ready to go, and it's not acceptable for Wizards of the Coast to not have set up a separate tournament environment. It's one thing to say, look, with millions of people playing our game and all these interactions, it's impossible for us to really create a stable environment right away when a set releases. That's one thing to say. But to not have a separate setup so that people can compete in a stable scenario. Okay, you can't make this work right when you got millions of people playing. How about if you only have a couple of dozen? Under controlled environments, there aren't tons of games going on all at once. Can you make it functionally operate then? Because this is a huge drawback for anybody who's trying to compete through the Arena venue. It's like, hey, would you like to be part of the World Championship? Well, you can play Paper Magic, where everything will always function perfectly, or you can try our digital variations, where MTGO or MTGA can totally just kick you in the teeth with bugs, and now all of a sudden you're just washed out of the event, and all your chances of becoming the world champion are gone because they couldn't make their cards work the way the cards are supposed to. That is a massive smack in the mouth to anybody stuck under these kind of particular circumstances. Like, you can say, well, just don't play the card, avoid that deck, but how fair is that across the board? If you're going to have a Pro Tour and you're going to include these programs as part of the Pro Tour, you need to put in the additional effort to ensure that it's actually going to function properly, and everybody who's going to be able to enter into this is playing on even footing. The whole point is to find the best players, right? We kick out the cheaters because we don't want them unbalancing things. So how is it fair to go, oh, well, do you want to play white, black, blue? Do you want to play with the obscura stuff? Well, I guess you should just eat a bag of sand because you're not going to get to, right? So that is a major issue for the upcoming Capenna Championship. Now, there was an article that was released today by Mark Rosewater, and it's going over design elements for Streets of New Capenna. And there were some interesting little nuggets in there, and one major thing. So before we talk about the major thing, let's cover the more minor things. So based on the questions that Rosewater was asked, it looks like going forwards, based on the success of Kamigawa and Streets of New Capenna, you can fully expect to see more Magic the Gathering sets basically placed in a more modern world or a futuristic world. Now, for me, my personal preference is more of the swords and sorcery style fantasy. You know what I mean? We're talking like the older days of Magic, but everybody's got their own preferences. And at the end of the day, if I get cool stories and cool cards, I'll be all right with it, but I do prefer the stuff we're going to get more at the end of this year, like Dominaria United, The Brothers' War. I'm hyped about that old school goodness. So, the other thing as well is that Streets of New Capenna was designed from a bottom-up perspective. And I honestly thought that it would be top-down design. And if you don't know the difference between the two, top-down is basically where you take a concept, like you have a particular flavor or theme. So in this case, if New Capenna was based on top-down design, you would go, we are doing a demon mobster set, and then you would build everything downwards from there, right? And just go, does everything fit into this flavor umbrella? Whereas a bottom-up design is actually way more interested in establishing your like mechanics. Instead of thematic elements, it's far more important to nail your mechanics down. And the reason that Streets of New Capenna is a bottom-up design instead of a top-down design is because of its tricolor setup. With the tricolor setup, they have a lot more restrictions in what they can do. They have to take a lot more care to make sure that things are roughly balanced across the board. The different colors are getting what they need to. It's actually kind of fascinating, but on the other hand, when you have that level of bottom-up design, it's more rigid, right? So there's less that you can do. So it does explain why there are a number of flavor divergences that feel very different from the cards, right? For example, cement shoes being a piece of equipment that makes somebody stronger and they can use in battle feels very, very odd, right? You would think that the cement shoes would be like a creature removal artifact or a creature destruction spell. So these are the kinds of things that you see more frequently in sets that are bottom-up designs where they go, we mechanically need this. So we mechanically need a piece of boosting equipment. We're going to put the cement shoes here, even though it technically should, from a top-down perspective, be something completely different. So for me, I find that to be pretty fascinating. The idea of Magic design top-up, bottom-up, top-down, all that is really cool. But the biggest item for me was about uniqueness and rules complexity on Magic cards. Because it's kind of funny. Back in the original days of Magic the Gathering, the cards had huge blocks of text. But that's just because they were super wordy. Instead of vigilance, it would say, when this creature attacks, it does not tap, right? And so you'd have actually way fewer abilities on a card, but they would be explained out to the fullest point, where certain cards would explain to you that when you take your opponent's card, you have to give him his property back at the end of the game. So what happened is, over time, Wizards found a way to trim that down, keywords and things like that, to make it less crazy down in the text box and make things clearer. They actually used to have a designation called Mystifier that they would use to go, we're removing these cards from the game because they mystify people. I really like the term Mystifier overall, right? But anyways, what's happened is the cards became less complex. And now we've seen over time, the complexity creep has just been going, whoop, and I mean, that makes sense. Magic the Gathering's been around for 30 years. And they essentially, most card games have to. There is an eventual like power scale you have to move up. Nobody's going to keep playing a game if it stays like this. They say they will, but they won't. Most people are going to bail. So the power creep thing is kind of unavoidable. And as a result, you end up with more and more words on cards, even when we're just using keywords. Look at Questing Beast. Questing Beast had like 18 abilities all over the card, right? So they can fit a lot more onto the card, and it can feel overwhelming with the amount of text that's on there. So somebody asked about complexity and Wizards of the Coast process, and apparently the way they're doing things now, which is new, is based on word uniqueness. So they don't worry about basically how much they're cramming onto a card. They worry about how many unique words are on this card. How many words are on here that you're not familiar with on the normal basis through Magic? How do we kind of meld this in to what you already know without introducing too many concepts, but to kind of piggyback on what you already know? So it's interesting to know that going forwards, they don't care how complex the cards get. They care about, like, individually, the cards don't matter for their own complexity anymore. What matters is how they contribute to what I'm calling the complexity pool for a set, right? So you have the overall complexity level of Magic, and then you have the additional complexity level that's added on by the set mechanics, right? But a lot of mechanics work where once you understand the text aligned with that mechanic, then you're just good to go, right? Like if I say first strike, you know that first strike means that this creature deals combat damage during the first strike portion. Double strike, you know, oh, that means it deals damage during the first strike and the regular strike portion, right? So keywords are a really good way to basically add complexity to the game, but without adding too much extra in terms of wordage, right? So the more of these keywords that they can kind of bump down, and we've seen increases in these over time, right? For the longest time, they were trying to find a keyword to use for milling, and then they just gave up and were like, okay, we will use the mill keyword that everybody else is using. So ultimately, what this means is you can expect that the only thing that Wizards of the Coast is really going to worry about in terms of making Magic too complex is introducing too many words that we've never seen before. And it's actually really simple and straightforward when you think about it. It's a pretty simple solution to the issue of we keep pushing the card complexity up. And understand that Arena also melds into this where they feel more comfortable pushing up the complexity. It was specifically addressed in the article saying that basically what happens, people go and use Arena, and what Arena does is it shortcuts your life in a lot of ways. And by that I mean, it basically does a bunch of things for you. There are people who have only played Magic on Arena, and when they go and play paper Magic, they're fumbling all over the place because Arena is going to push you through every one of your phases. Anytime you have an opportunity to respond, Arena is going to prompt you to do it, right? So Arena does a lot of the heavy lifting just in terms of flowing you through your turn. But it does even more in terms of dealing with all the fiddly little bits of any kind of mechanics you have. Do you have a mechanic that needs to count things up? Do you have a mechanic that needs to check different types of counters? Whatever it is, they have setups where basically it's all shortcutted and made easier for you. So that also lends itself to Wizards' willingness to crank up that complexity, going, okay, well, you know what? For the people who are playing on Arena, the software should take care of it, so we're not going to worry that much. So basically, underneath it all, what I expect this means is that we're going to see more and more of these crazy, monstrous cards like the Questing Beast, where they just staple more and more and more abilities onto them. And I mean, I'm not going to complain about that because I love cards that are loaded down with absolutely insane amounts of abilities. But I found it truly fascinating that now they're focusing on unique words because it seems like a good choice to sort of solve the problem. How else do you deal with the fact that you need to keep pushing the boundaries of Magic? You need to keep introducing new abilities. You can't just keep what you have, regardless of what people say. We crave novelty. Magic requires change and growth to keep going. Otherwise, it's stagnation and we lose people. For me, I can't actually think of a different way to increase what Magic has to offer while making the cards less complex, right? It genuinely feels like a move backwards. And it's such a simple idea of, yo, why don't we just pay attention to the new things we're bringing to the game and not worry about anything else? So, as far as I know, that's going to be the design strategy for X number of years. Who knows? It takes a while before this information trickles out, and usually they don't broadcast it. Usually it's tucked away in some little Wizards employee, like happily answering questions to somebody. You will find these little nuggets. But anyways, that's what I wanted to discuss today. Thanks for coming by, my friends. Big shout out to all my patrons, and I will see all of you, my friends, in the next video.